So today, picking up my story where I left off, and before I begin, I wanted to just acknowledge the fire, to hold space, to transmute, transform anything that comes up for me to be healed, be sending to the fire. Also going to light a little Palo Santo to just clear my energy. It's been a long few days since the last time I shared my story, and I just kind of want to clear myself. Just center myself, because I've been kind of running errands and taking care of things, and now's the time for myself to share from my heart. And so just asking the Palo Santo to help open my heart and bring up the things that are relevant for me to share today. Moving on from episode 2 was, my childhood and what it was like growing up in an LDS atmosphere. I got married and had a baby quickly. There was a part of me once I became a mother that really wanted spirituality to come back into our life. And, being raised Mormon, that was the only spirituality I knew, was the Mormon teachings. And my husband was also raised as a Mormon, but we had very different upbringings in the church. He had a father that never went to church, and his mother did go to church. So he wrestled with the idea, do I go with my father and play on Sundays, or do I go to church with my mom? And so he just had a very different upbringing because he had a choice about church on Sunday. I didn't. We went to church every freaking Sunday, and there was no choice about it. So we started our marriage where church really wasn't important. And then after having a baby, that really changed for me. And I felt this need for spirituality to come back into my life. And so he didn't want to go back to church. And I remember taking my newborn baby. He was probably 3 months old when I went back to church for the first time, first and last for a while, because the people were so mean to me. I was, I looked like a single mother coming to church with her little baby. So people right off the bat judged me as that. Those that knew that I was married and had a husband, he had grown up in that ward. We were living in Randy's childhood home. His parents had moved out and rented the house. And so we had one level of the house, and then renters had the basement. And so everybody at church knew Randy and knew his family. And they were not nice to us. They were very judgy. Like I said, Utah Mormons are snobs. I'll just put it plainly. And so we hadn't done anything right. Randy hadn't gone on a mission, which boys are supposed to do. We hadn't got married in the temple. And so that first Sunday that I tried to go back to church alone with my 2 or 3 month old baby, people were so mean. And that's not what I was used to. My home ward, our family was kind of looked up to, and everyone had been kind to me regardless. And so it was a real slap in the face and wake up call to realize not all people are that proclaim to be Christians are truly Christ-like, because nobody cared about me. And those that did come talk to me. It wasn't, we're so happy to see you. It's so great to have you come to church. It was, where's your husband? Why can't you get him to come to church? What's going on? People were just rude and mean, especially the old women in his ward. And there were a lot of them. And it was a 3-hour block meeting. So after 3 hours by myself, with every meeting, different people coming up to me and asking about my situation, why wasn't Randy with me? That's really what most people seem to care about. They didn't care that I was there making an effort. They just wanted to know where he was. And I was like, okay, this sucks. I am not doing this ever again. I remember coming home and was like, if you don't come with me to church, I will not go. It's ridiculous. And we did go to my parents' ward a little bit because they were nicer to us, but you're not supposed to go to other ward boundaries or other wards. It's Mormonism. They're kind of anal about that. You go at the time that you're designated to go based on where you live. And so, yeah, there was no place for us. And until we had our crisis of almost getting divorced and deciding to really try to go back, the bishop was working with us. Like I said, in the last episode, he worked with us for 9 months. We met the bishop every week. We did all these things. We go through the temple. And 2 weeks after we went through the temple, our bishop got moved into the stake presidency, which is like the next level up of leadership. And the new bishop that came in didn't know us from Adam. Again, did not care about us. And so we had callings, jobs in the church that did not require us to be there on Sunday. So we quickly fell back into our old patterns of not going to church. The problem was, for me, being inactive again was easy. It was easy to not go to church, but the guilt. I had this new layer of guilt that I didn't have before because we hadn't gone through the temple. Now that we had been through the temple and were wearing our sacred underwear and had made these covenants, it caused me a lot of just guilt and shame that we were not doing everything we were supposed to do by going to church. We weren't doing that. So at the time I was going to school, and my husband was also in school. My degree is in family life and human development. I went to college not to have a career. I went to college to be the best mother I could be. And now, looking back at it, maybe every mother feels this way. I feel like I did not do as good a job as I could have with raising my children, but I know I did my best. And that was the reason I studied family life and human development, was just to be a better mother. And I had no intention of holding a job after I graduated. And so I graduated from college in 92 and was ready to have our next child. And I'd been on birth control and it just messed everything up. So it was hard getting pregnant again. So my first pregnancy I lost. The second pregnancy was also hard to conceive. And then baby number 2 was hard to conceive. So when he finally came into this world, I was so happy. I felt like everything had come together. We had been through the temple. Even though we weren't super active, we were faithful in wearing our garments and faithful in obeying most of the rules. We were paying tithing. We weren't drinking. We were, following the Mormon church as best we could. And I had this beautiful new little baby. My first baby was a redhead with blue eyes. My second baby was, in fact, I kind of want to share pictures, so I might do that. My second baby was black hair, black eyes. They looked totally opposite of each other. So yeah, I'm going to go grab that. Okay, so this is a picture of my first little boy, my redhead, blue-eyed, happy little baby number 1. And this is baby number 2. Black hair, black eyes, a little papoose. And he had the Indian or Mongolian, however you want to describe it, birthmark, which is an important little piece that will come into play later. The doctor, everyone at the hospital thought my husband was Mexican or Native American just by looking at the child. And I had to tell everyone, no, we're just 2 normal white people. But we had this little cute papoose baby. And then when he was about 2 weeks old, of course, he had those birthmarks. They were really bright. They looked like bruises on the backside of my baby. And it freaked me out. And I asked the doctor about it. And he's like, well, do you have any Native American blood? And I'm like, well, I believed we did. On my grandmother's father, I believed was Native American. But that's a story again for another time. And he's like, well, that's a typical birthmark. So that child, he had that for, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 before it went away. But it just looked like he had bruises on the back of his backside. Really scared me when the first time I saw it. Was like, what happened to my child to cause this bruise? But it wasn't a bruise, it was a birthmark. So my first 2 babies, totally opposite of each other. We were still semi going to church, just only on occasion. And then my husband graduated in 95. So baby number 2 was born in 93. And when my husband graduated, I was pregnant again with baby number 3. And it was a boy. He was not hard to conceive. He came very easily. And so Randy graduated and we moved to our his first job in Colorado. So when we were in Utah, I really hated being in the ward that my husband grew up in. And I still hated going to church, but I was studying the scriptures. I was studying the manuals and learning everything about the religion. So my desire was when we moved that we would kind of have a clean slate and start over fresh. Wherever we moved into, my goal was to be good, active Mormons and go back to church. And we did. It was much easier to go to church in Colorado Springs, where we moved. My husband got a job with HP, Hewlett Packard. And so life was hard. We were just kind of living paycheck to paycheck because everything was so much more expensive in Colorado than it was in Utah. But our little baby number 3 popped in. And this time he came out with blonde hair and hazel eyes. Genetics are a fun thing. So yeah, 3 little boys in a row that kind of looked nothing alike. By then my oldest was 6, and then I had the 2-year-old and then a newborn baby. And people in Colorado were very nosy and not afraid to point out the fact that my children did not look like each other. We did not have cookie cutter children. We had unique recipes every time we made one. And so people were very just free with pointing that out. And my poor little son that was in the middle, with the black hair, black eyes, olive skin, looked just like his dad. And the other two looked more like me. So he got, a lot of people told him he was adopted when he was growing up, which was not true. Kind of gave him a little complex about that because he did not look like his two siblings, his two closest siblings. So yeah, we're a young little family, doing better at going to church every Sunday and living the life that I imagined, that I had pictured as, a child and in my youth. And so it was overwhelming having 3 kids. We were outnumbered. Life was just hard. So there was a little bit of a space between baby number 3 and baby number 4. Baby number 4 came in 1999, and I had another little redhead, blue-eyed baby. And so I had 4 boys in a row, and that was really overwhelming. They were great for each other. I understand why my 4 boys came in that order, but for me, I was kind of at my wit's end, and postpartum depression was a thing for me after baby 4. So I was struggling with the postpartum depression and the idea that I had 4 boys, and my husband. It was like testosterone city, it was overwhelming to me. And at this time, the bishop, it was one of his counselors. I had just given birth to my fourth baby, and the bishop called and said, they wanted to extend a calling. That means they want to give you a job. And they release you from jobs and they give you jobs. That's their call. You don't get to ask for a specific job in the church. You don't get to say when you're done with a specific job. They tell you when you're done. They tell you what job you can do. And so I'm like, sure. I had been talking to God in my own way and praying and saying to God what I needed was a job with other women. In the Relief Society, that's the women's organization, or the Young Women's Organization. I would have been happy to do anything in those jobs, but I was praying to God, please do not put me with small children. Do not ask me to do things with the Boy Scouts. Just no. I need adults. I need to be with women and adults. Because my state of mind at that point in time with the postpartum depression, I was like, I cannot do these kinds of callings. And I had many talks with God about that. So the time comes, the counselor comes to meet with me, and the job that they decide is perfect for me is to be a den mother to 10-year-old boys. Once a week, I'm supposed to hold Boy Scouts in my home to a bunch of freaking 10-year-old boys. And at first I laughed because I thought, he can't be serious. He literally came to me with the job that I told God I cannot do. And when I realized he was serious, I was like, well, no, I can't do that. I cannot do that job. You put a whole bunch of 10-year-old boys in my home. I already have 10-year-old boys in my home every day because my son had friends. And I'm like, I just really laughed because I had been talking to God, and how could they not get the message from God? It didn't occur to me that they were correct and I was wrong, which is what they believed. They believed that their message from God was I needed to work more with children and boys. And that was my first little inkling that, these men might not be a true connection to God. Because if they think that's what I really need, and if God thinks that's what I really need, they are fucking wrong. And I said, I'm not doing it. I said no. And he looked at me like I was the first person in his life to tell him no. And we were kind of like, it was a battle of wills for a second. And my husband was like not going to get in the middle of it. He didn't come to my rescue, but he didn't also come and say, you should do this. He knew I was like pretty determined, and knew my place, knew what I could handle and knew what I couldn't handle. And I believed God knew that. So if God told them that I could handle it, that was the first time I really thought, well, maybe they are not talking to the same God I am. I don't know. I was very confused that they would come to me with this calling that I absolutely knew I could not do. Mentally, there's no way I could take that on. So he left my house very dejected and put out that I had told him no, that I had messed up their perfect plan of having me be teaching the 10-year-old Boy Scouts as a den mother. That was the first little major crack in my shelf, because I specifically had been praying and hoping God would call me to something with women. I needed more adult women in my life, and that was not the case. So I don't remember what calling eventually, I don't think I held one for a while. And then I was quickly pregnant again with baby number 5. Those two were less than 2 years apart. And so I had 4 young boys, and I'm like, sorry, if I don't have my girl, I'm gonna go crazy. Like, this is another conversation with God. I'm like, if you do not send me my daughter, I don't know what I'll do. Like, if I have 5 boys in a row, I will have to rethink the whole 8 babies. I'm like, I know I have 2 girls. And I'm like, if you don't freaking send me one of my daughters, so help me, I don't know that I can continue with this plan of having 8 children. So these were just my thoughts and talks with God. And we did peek to see, and it was a girl. So that was great. That was a prayer answered. At this time, there was also another woman in our ward who was pregnant, and she had 4 boys, and they were the same ages as our 4 boys. And she had been called to the primary presidency. It's basically, there's only certain jobs that women can do. Women can be over other women, and women can be over children. And so she was the president of all the children from 0 to 12. And she requested that I be one of her counselors. And I remember when they came to me with this calling, I'm like, I'm pregnant. I don't know if I can do this. And I had already turned down the last calling. So there was a lot of guilt on me. And I felt like, well, I can't tell them no again. So I said, I'll try. I will do it as to the best of my ability. And it was fun working with this other mom who also had 4 boys, and was supposedly having a girl. So we were basically in the same situation. I think she was due about a month after me. And so we worked together. We took care of the children of the church. We are in charge of them for 2 hours, all the children from nursery through age 12. And it's our job to do lessons when they're in a group setting. It was not an easy calling at all. And there was a lot of planning. Like, you're planning and preparing all week long for Sunday. So this was August-ish. And by December, I was completely burned out. I was freaking done. And I told that to her, and I said, I'm going to ask to be released from this calling, because it's too much. I had struggled with postpartum depression, and my babies, number 4 and number 5, were so close together. I knew what I could handle and what I couldn't, and I had reached my limit for the calling. So I gave her a heads up and said, you need to be thinking of someone to replace me, and I'm going to let the bishopric, the man who was in charge of over the primary, I'm going to let him know that they have to release me in our next meeting. And so that meeting came, and we get to a point where, I can raise my hand and speak. And I told this man who's in the bishopric that I was done with the calling and that I needed to be released. And his response to me was, you don't get to tell us when you're done. God will tell us when you're done, and we'll replace you then. I said, well, you better talk to God, because I'm done. I said, I will do this one more month. So you have 4 weeks. I will be here every Sunday for the next 4 weeks. That gets you through the new year. But my baby's due in March, and I'm done. Like, that is all I will give you. So you either talk to God and clear it up on your end. And I think I could be so strong with him because I was pregnant. I don't think my normal self would have talked to him that way. But because I had the extra surge of hormones and I was kind of in mother bear mode, I knew what I had to do to take care of myself, and I was not going to take no for an answer. So I'm like, in 4 weeks, you better be prepared to have me replaced. And he's like, well, you just don't get to do that. We callings are not a whim of the person. Like, they're from God, and God will release you. And I'm like, good. Tell God he's got 4 more weeks. He's going to release me in 4 more weeks because I'm done. I said, I will not do this calling. And it is not fair to the president if you do not replace me, because she's in the same boat I am. We're both pregnant. And if you do not replace me, that is just wrong, because I know my limits. And if God isn't telling you, then that's on you, because I'm telling you that I can't do it. So that was my next little taste of maybe these men are not talking to God or talking to the same God I am. So yeah, that was a big, it was an icky feeling that it left me with, that this man would talk that way to me as a pregnant woman and tell me that I didn't know what was right for me. He was basically saying he knew better and that I needed to stay in the calling. And I called his bullshit on that. So baby number 5, my little girl, came, and you can't really tell it in this picture, but she has dark hair. Not black like my other son, but she was a dark-haired little girl with dark eyes. So I did have a child that looked a little, Mike wasn't alone with the Irish babies that were my redheads and blue eyes. So yeah, I got my girl in 2000. And today is her birthday. Today she turns 24, my sweet little baby girl who answered my prayer, is turning 24. And she's preparing for her wedding, which I am so thankful to say will not be in a Mormon temple. Thank God. So yeah, it was, I got my girl and really struggled with postpartum depression after her. So after my daughter, she was born in 2001. So my birthday is 9/11. So we all know 9/11, 2001, what happened that day. And that was a really hard day for me. I turned 33 when that happened. And there was a lot of soul searching for me. There were cracks starting to show in the Mormon church. It wasn't all that I had thought it was, but I didn't have courage to leave it. I didn't have courage to question it. But 9/11 was, gosh, just give me a sec. Fill in the body. React to that. Wow. Send that to the fire. Oh. Talk about human sacrifice and sorrow, sadness. 9/11 struck me really hard. And I remember my father making comments like, because it happened on my birthday, I was so sucked in to the stories and the trauma and the experiences that people had on the planes before they crashed and in the building. And I remember one woman talking about how she had, she was trapped there. She was one of the few people that were rescued the day after out of one of the buildings. And I remember talking about how she was inspired, her talking about how she was inspired and knew she was going to be okay. And I remember talking to my father about that because Mormons believe we have the gift of the Holy Ghost, and we're the only ones that have this special connection because of the gift of the Holy Ghost, this special connection to God. And he answers our prayers. Sounds so horrible. Easier or better or clearer than other people who do not have the gift of the Holy Ghost. And listening to this woman's story, something in me said, no, that's not true. She had what I would call the gift of the Holy Ghost. She had this connection to source, which I wouldn't have used that word. I would have used Heavenly Father. But that was the first time that there was some cognitive dissonance introduced in a really strong way. The stories of 9/11, and people were inspired. People, it just rubbed me the wrong way that these people who weren't Mormon were not going to go to heaven or be saved. It was just the first time that such a major disaster had affected me and started to make me question the beliefs and the dogma of Mormonism. So when my little girl turned a year, my husband's family did something that was really beautiful. They took all the married couples on a cruise, all the married couples that wanted to go. So my husband's family only has 4 children in it, and there's 3 boys and 1 girl. And my husband is the youngest boy. So there were 4 couples that went on the cruise. And it's kind of funny, because of 9/11, none of us wanted to ride on the same plane. In case it went down or there was a problem, at least one parent would maybe survive with the children. That was kind of our mentality. But we were coming from Colorado and everybody else was coming from Utah, so they could split up. But my husband and I, we kind of had to take the same plane. So my sister came out to watch our children and my parents. Between my parents and my sister, my 5 kids were taken care of, and we went on this cruise to Hawaii. We got on board the cruise ship in Ensenada, Mexico, and then sailed for 4 days on the ocean, and then island hopped for the rest of the 6 days. It was a 10-day cruise. And it was a beautiful experience. I loved being with his family. They laugh and joke and tease and flirt. 4 Garrett boys together, including, their dad. There was a lot of flirting, and it was a really good time together. The first stop was in Hilo, Hawaii, and one of the first places we went to was the Mormon temple, because all of us were pretty much temple worthy, except for his father. He didn't have a recommend, but the temple was being under construction, not under construction. It was being, what is the word, redone. It wasn't open for business. So we could just go to the temple grounds and saw the temple grounds, and it was very beautiful. And one of my favorite pictures is our family all lined up, sitting on the ground in front of the Mormon temple. It was just a really fun experience. And then after we saw that, we all went to the ocean, and all his siblings snorkeled. I was born with some, like I said, I believe in reincarnation, and I was born with some really deep-seated fears that I believe stem from other lifetimes. Fear of bears, fear of the ocean, drowning in the ocean. That was like one of my number one fears. And so when we went to the ocean, his parents weren't going to get in. So they just were sitting on the beach, and I was just going to wade. Like, there was no way in hell I was going to put my face in the water. So I'm just playing along the shore, and the sea turtles were like right there. I could see the turtles. I just couldn't see any of the fish, the cool fish that everyone else was seeing. But there was no fucking way I was going to put my head in the water and chance drowning again. It was so clear that was just an irrational fear of mine that I believe stemmed from a past life. So that was our first island experience, first little taste. And I remember Randy coming up to me. He'd been snorkeling and swimming, and I had just been on the little shore waiting. And he's like, just try it. He had me put the snorkel gear on, and I tried to stick my face in the water, and it was 100% immediate panic attack. I was like, no, I am not doing this. I don't care how beautiful the fish are. There's no fucking way I'm putting my head in the water. And so eventually it was time to get back on the cruise ship, go to the other side of the island, and it was really beautiful. We did see some lava flowing, and every day there was just excursions, right? Beautiful excursions and chances to play on the beach and play in the ocean. And his family, of course, all went in and snorkeled. We went to Maui. The stop on Maui, we did go snorkeling at Malakini. It's like a sunken crater in the ocean. It was so beautiful. And it took everything I had to get the courage to get in the water and snorkel. And one of the conditions was I had to have a pool, a little pool noodle, so that I didn't drown and die. And my husband had to hold my hand the entire time. And I did it. I snorkeled. We had a really beautiful experience, and I was very happy. The last day that we were there, we were on, well, next to the last day. Last day was Oahu. The last day that we got to do excursions and then get back on the ship was Kauai. And we were in Kauai, and we went to the Fern Grotto, and there had been a hurricane that destroyed a bunch of the it wasn't quite as, it hadn't come back to life because of the hurricane. So, I mean, it was okay. It was beautiful. But then his family, two of the couples decided, well, his parents and another brother and his wife decided to go back to the ship to go to church because it was a Sunday. And yes, Mormons have church. Doesn't matter where you are. The cruise ship didn't matter. So they went back to go to church. And luckily, his other brother and wife were willing to be bad Mormons and go play in the ocean. So this was our last time to get to play in the ocean before we had to, go back home. So we split apart. They went to the cruise ship. We went to the beach. And damn it, I want to show a picture. Hang on. Okay. So I know these waves don't look super big. Oh, maybe that glare isn't going to be great. But they were over my head. Okay. So my husband and his brother are getting ready to boogie board. And there's our cruise ship in the distance. And my husband and his brother playing in the ocean. I don't know why I felt like I had to show a picture, but like I said, spirit led, just doing going with the flow. So my plan is to stay on the shore. They were doing little body boards. And there was no way in hell I was going to get on one of those. So I had done my hair. I was in my swimming suit. But my whole objective was to take pictures, look pretty, and just walk the beach and look for shells and sea glass and things like that. So my brother-in-law felt sorry for me. Thought I could not possibly be having a good time because I wasn't in the water with him and his wife and my husband. And he did not know about my deep, deep fear of the ocean. So I'm looking at the ground, trying to find shells and sea glass, and all of a sudden, swoop, he picked me up and ran me into the ocean. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Fear rose up in my heart, and he took me out far past the waves, and I started to have a full-blown panic attack. And the only thing I could think of was to haul my little ass back to the shore. So I remember like pushing him away and just trying as hard as I could to get back to the shore. Well, when I got to the point where those waves were crashing in onto the beach, I stood up thinking I had made it. I could see the beach. I'm all good. But I was right in the path of the waves. And like I said, they were taller than me. So the first wave hit and I was thrown down to the bottom of the ocean and scrubbed like a sponge. That is the feeling of it. Like I was buried into the sand and then just scrubbed, and the water, I could feel the pressure over me, and then I could feel it recede. I could take a breath, and then it happened right over top of me again. And that just repeated. I couldn't get out of that cycle by myself. And I remember having a true feeling of, okay, well, this is how I die. It's the end. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but at that moment in time, I thought, I can't get out of this cycle. And I thought it was the end. And I was shown my little children. I had a little mini flashback of my children at home and had some sorrow, but it was like, there's nothing I can do. Like, I can't get out of this cycle of the waves by myself. So I remember reaching that point of surrender and all of a sudden just relaxing with the water and the feeling of it scrubbing me into the bottom of the ocean and receding off of me, gasping for air, and then being pummeled again. And it was just at the point where I was thinking, I can't do this anymore. That my husband had one arm and his brother had the other arm, and the two of them dragged me out of the ocean. And I was completely covered with seashells. You know how you look, people who are covered with bees? That's how I looked, with the seashells. And I remember my first thought was, I'm going to fucking kill my brother-in-law. Like, he is dead. And my husband is like sweetly trying to clear my eyes. And he's like, what happened? Why did you do that? I'm like, no, I didn't do that. Your brother did that. Like, it is his fault. And, but the thing I didn't realize at the time was that was a shamanic initiation, probably my first shamanic initiation where I faced death and fear. Fear is the glue, I've already said this, that the Mormon church uses to keep them in your grasp. But when you start to learn to face those fears, slowly the mind conditioning and the indoctrination starts to go away, starts to have cracks or parting of the curtains to see the man behind the curtain. Wizard of Oz analogy there. You start to see the man behind the curtain, and that's what that was for me. Facing my fear of dying in the ocean really opened up something for me, and that was 2001, and it still took a decade before I was willing to truly question and leave. But I had faced fear, and I had faced like what I thought was the worst thing that could happen to me, death by drowning, and survived it. I was baptized in Kauai in that experience. It was a shamanic baptism. It was a death and a rebirth. My husband and brother-in-law, when they pulled me from the ocean, they did not pull out the same girl that went in, for sure. And I just didn't know it at the time. There was a lot of things I didn't know at that time. But that was my first true shamanic initiation of death and rebirth. And there would be so many more of those kinds of experiences. But that is not something I was ever taught about in the Mormon religion. So we come back, and Randy's father, that trip took a huge toll on him. And in fact, I have a picture of them, of the boys, the Garrett boys. Let's see. So Randy's father's in the wheelchair there, and his brothers. This was on Oahu, our last day. We went to the Polynesian Center, which is owned by the LDS Church. He was on oxygen and in a wheelchair for the rest of his life after that trip. It took that big of a toll on him, Randy's dad. And when they flew back into Salt Lake and got home, they immediately took him to the emergency room. And there was nothing more really the doctors could do. They basically said, your lungs are shot from decades of smoking. And so he was on oxygen and in and out of a wheelchair for the rest of his life, which was, he lived three more years. That experience made Randy and I really reconsider about where we were living. My husband's job had changed from Colorado, and it was now in Boston, but he was working remote. It was 2 weeks work at home, and then usually 2 weeks in Boston. And I'm like, we can do that anywhere. Let's let's move back to Utah. Gross. It wasn't about being in Utah. It was being about next to family, especially because we knew his dad was now on the path to death. He was dying. And so it took us a year to kind of get all things in order and sell our home. By 2003, we had moved back to Utah to be close to his parents and our children. We wanted them to have some experience with their grandparents. My parents lived maybe 20 minutes away, and so did Randy's. So we moved back to Mormon territory in Utah and got to say goodbye to his dad, which was the whole reason for being there. And we did have some experiences that were really beautiful. Maybe I'll share at another time. We were still in and out of the church. It was not an easy path for us. And especially now that I had kind of been initiated into a different way of thinking, and had some experience standing up to the patriarchy, I didn't know it at the time, but my shelf was starting to crack. In 2005, Randy's job was no longer in Boston, and his father passed away in 2004. So we got a year, basically, is all we got with his dad, and our kids got to know their grandfather a little bit. So by 2005, the job had changed, and we had to move back to Colorado. It was during that move that as we were preparing for that move, I got pregnant again and lost that baby. So it was one of those weird things that happened. I was pregnant, lost the baby, and then literally the next month got pregnant again. And then we left to move back to Colorado. So I didn't know I was pregnant until we were already moving into our house, into Colorado Springs again. And so baby number 6 was another redhead, blue-eyed baby boy. And at this point, this is 2006 when this little buddy came. There's one thing I wanted to share before that. So while I was pregnant with this little guy, my daughter was in kindergarten. There's a 5-year gap between my baby 5 and baby 6. I remember buying some tea at the grocery store. Now, tea is against the word of wisdom. Mormons do not drink tea. And, good Mormons don't drink tea, right? Good Mormons don't drink coffee. And I don't know why, but this tea called to me, and I remember buying it at the store, and I drank it in the afternoon when my daughter was in kindergarten, and laid down and took a nap. And I had my first lucid, you could call it lucid dreaming. For me, it was a true out-of-body experience. I left my body. I could see my body on the couch. And for me, this was the first time I had ever done anything shamanic, journeyed, and I would not have used those words. I didn't know what was happening to me when I had this experience of leaving my body, and I could go anywhere in my house as a spirit. And I knew I could go outside of my house. I knew I could cross that barrier, go through the wall and go outside, but there was still a little bit of caution within me. And I was like, no, I'm not ready to do that. But I explored my house top to bottom. while I was taking this nap on the couch. And it was a beautiful experience, being outside of my body like that. And then I saw the clock on the wall and saw what time it was. And then I panicked because I knew I had to go pick up my daughter and all my other children from school. And I knew I couldn't do it out of my body. I had to get back in it somehow. And I was kind of thinking, okay, this is really, really weird. It took me a little bit to figure out how to get back in my body and to wake myself up. Once I got in my body, then it was like sleep paralysis. Like I knew I was in my body. I knew I was aware, but I couldn't make my body move. So that was a panic. And I remember when I finally did get my motor function back in and I sat up, my Mormon mind blamed all of that on the tea. I had broken the fucking word of wisdom and then had this lucid dream, or whatever you want to call it. What I call it now was my first shamanic experience of journeying, what it's like to journey outside your body. And man, I really panicked because I thought it was because of the tea. It had nothing to do with the tea. The tea might have just been what opened up myself to the possibility. I don't know. So I was pregnant with this little guy when that experience happened. And I remember like throwing the box into the garbage. Like I am not touching that stuff again. It freaked me the hell out. 'Cause like I said, there's no explanation for that kind of thing in Mormonism, except for maybe a satanic explanation. And I knew it wasn't that. It wasn't an evil experience or a bad experience. It was actually quite beautiful, learning how to travel, but I didn't have a box to put that in. So it kind of also went up on my shelf, like whatever that was. Can't think about that again. And I threw the tea away. So I went and picked up my kids and didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell anyone that I had drank the tea and had this crazy shamanic experience. So that brings us to the end of today. Baby number 6, another little boy, another little Irish baby. So at this point, I have 4 boys that kind of look alike with the red hair and the bluish eyes, hazel eyes, and then my daughter with brown hair and my other son with pitch black hair. So I got 2 babies to go. And here we go again, hey. So my next child was a little girl born with Down syndrome, special needs. And I'm going to share her story next time. Next time will be the story of my little earth angel. And she turned 17 a week ago, last week. She turned 17. So my daughters are 7 years apart. And I will share her story, next time. Thank you for listening. And until then.